Hello, and welcome to the Watershed Moments podcast, where I and other therapists discuss real life, everyday mental health issues to give you real and practical help to live a healthier life for yourself and with others. Now, if you want more content like this, be sure to visit our website at watershedinitiative.com to dig into the library of podcasts, articles, and courses that we've made just for you. And of course, if you need face to face help, definitely reach out to our partner affiliate, Lifeology of Richardson and Frisco, at 214 556 0996 to get connected with a therapist or life coach. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Watershed Moments podcast. I am joined here with my colleagues and my friends. I'll do a quick introduction real quick. We've got Adrian Jones, LPC intern. Say hey, Adrian.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Good. And we've got Laura Harrison, LPC.
Hi, y'all.
And we've got Shanda Gunter. She is Renew Director at Chase Oaks Church.
Hello.
All right. So, hey guys, we are in the middle of a series really meant to be kind of like a Q&A. We're hoping to get really engagement from our listeners out there to have them ask questions, and we can just sit and talk through some of the cases and some of the situations that people are going through. And so, yeah, we are going to pick that up in this episode, and we're going to ask Shanda to go ahead and introduce a common thing that she might be hearing out there, and allowing us to be able to kind of talk it through together, both from a personal and also from a professional standpoint, just to be able to kind of unpack that discussion so that people are not going through these things in isolation, that we're able to kind of talk about it out loud with one another and maybe get multiple perspectives, especially from a mental health perspective as well. So, yeah, Shanda, go ahead. What do you got for us?
So a lot of people are, I think, feeling this right now because schools have just stopped, and there was so much that was wrapped up in that for teachers and families and students, and now that's been taken away, and they're going to miss out on a lot. And now those feelings are starting to settle in. And I even think about like my students at the harbor, and I have some seniors, and like we're not going to have our senior banquet, and we're not going to get to do some of these things that we've been looking forward to, and everybody's feeling that across the board. So what would you guys say to people who are kind of sitting in that right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know what, I actually, I think it would be maybe good for us to help contextualize this question a little bit more broadly, because I think this is a really common one, and I think a lot of people are feeling it in different ways. And I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to maybe just share and open it up to the rest of you guys too, to just talk about how that might be affecting you too, and how you might relate with this one. Because I know I've got an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and particularly my 8-year-old. Yeah, like I forget. I think a lot of us as parents forget how much this impacts our kids, and even to from that standpoint, how much it affects us as well in terms of what we don't have anymore. And so I know that my oldest daughter, Evangeline, is really sad about her school. Like we drove by just the other day, her school, and I think I saw her like tearing up because she knew that she couldn't go there right now. And so there's just that kind of stuff that's going on. And so, yeah, I'm curious to hear from you guys if you experience some of these things as well, and kind of what you feel and what you observe, just to help maybe connect us a little bit better for our listeners.
Well, I think one of the things I've noticed is that when you have a situation like this, it's very different than pretty much anything we've ever experienced before, because it's not like it's a natural disaster, but it's not one that you can point to like Katrina or like a tornado where you can look around and it's obvious that things are messed up. I mean, people who are in close proximation or have someone in their family who is ill feel that much deeper than the rest of us who are kind of on the outside of that going, this is a natural disaster, but it's not really affecting me, but I'm having to change a lot in my life to make sure that I'm safe and that other people are safe, and I'm willing to do that. But the whole world still looks normal, but I can't be normal and the world can't be normal. Mm-hmm. As opposed to like if there was a tornado or a flood or a hurricane, everything looks abnormal at that point. So I think that's some of the disconnect for people trying to deal with this and process it as either trauma or grief that makes it difficult to kind of make that connection. It's kind of like there's this waiting period, like this is going to be over soon. It keeps getting extended, but this should be over soon, right? But it's not.
Yeah, I think I was reading something about how, like, just because it's a virus and it's unseen, people don't see it. It makes it hard to really adjust the way you think about life and shifting your perspective. To your point, Laura, yeah, if it was, I mean, we got hit by a tornado here in the Dallas area just like a few like last fall, and that had you could see like physical wreckage that's from that, and so there's a mental connect. Okay, there's tangible loss here, like real property loss. And I think because of just what you said, like we're having a hard time catching up to that like our brains haven't really contextualized it that way because we don't see it that way. And so we're seeing a lot of the blowback in some of the sub wreckage that happens, but it's not as obvious to us, I think, in that situation. I think that's actually a really good point. Anyone else got any ways in which they could relate to this question and this kind of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's twofold to me. The first part is the ability to let people recognize, because Laura hit on a great point. There are people who are actually losing their lives right now, right? So that's one bucket. We'll put it into that. But then there are other people's whose lives have just been completely flipped on their head, right? So we use the aspect. Shanda gave a great analogy of seniors losing out on everything that they thought about, right? Like whether it's graduation or prom, right, or something on that level. But the ability to validate people and say that's grief too, right? Like that's a loss of something as well. And to be able to come around them and let them know, hey, it's okay to grieve that. Yeah, you were supposed to get married this month. That's a huge moment for a lot of people. Or the aspect of birthday parties. My On a personal level, my daughter turned 3 2 weeks ago. And so, of course, we had our entire birthday set up, and she was really excited about it. She kept talking about how all her friends were going to come and everything as far as that went. And there was this moment of, for parents, my wife and I, we started to panic a little bit, right? Like, oh, this is not going to be well. Like, what are we going to say to her? How do we come around this? And I think there was this moment of recognizing that we had to, and this is the second part for me, which is to reframe. And there can be a moment of resiliency that gets built into that. Of, well, let's say this. We came to her and just said, hey, one, we didn't explain to her, she's 3, we didn't explain to her that the party wasn't going to happen or anything. Basically, what we came over the game plan, and we said to everyone, like, look, let's just make this an awesome situation for her, and let's just have a great time. And she didn't realize it, of course, right? Like, all she cared about was she got her cake, she got her ice cream, and she got a bunch of presents, and she was super pumped about that. And so it's the ability to say, you know what, first and foremost, to everyone out there, grieve it. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to feel some sadness that goes along with missing out on an event, a life event that you really were looking forward to. The second part is, though, how do we come around that and say, but I can turn this into a positive. I can reframe this and look at some of the positives that are going into that are happening, right? So how do we come around it that way is the second part to me, is recognizing that just because there's a negative that's going on, there are still a ton of positives that can be pulled from that. It really boils down to that individual making that choice to be resilient in that moment and reframing and saying, hey, you know what? Let's pull the positives out of this situation, and then we can kind of progress forward from there.
Yeah, I like that. I think you said something in there that I think would help to frame this for our listeners a lot better. But before I go down that road, I wanted to just check in with Shanda. Is there anything that you might be able to say? Because you shared the initial case, but if you observe this in your own life in different ways as well, just wanted to connect this for our listeners a little bit better too.
I've felt this in a couple of ways, and I think the biggest way is with my students at the harbor. I've got this one student who, for our banquet this year, it was her time to shine, and she's been coming for 4 years, and we're very close, and everyone has poured so much into the student, and we love her so much. And we kept pushing back. Okay, we're not going to meet for a couple more weeks. Okay, we're not going to meet for a couple more weeks, and now it's that. Okay, it's final. It's not. We're not coming back together. And when I've talked to teachers and stuff, they felt this also. And when we broke for spring break, we didn't realize that we weren't going to get to hug our kids again. Like, it's going to make me cry now. Just thinking about that. And like, I want to hug that student one more time. And I was talking to my son, his teacher this week, and she said, if I would have known that was going to be my last chance to hug those students, then I would have hugged every one of them and squeezed them a little bit tighter. And
Yeah.
wow, I didn't know I was going to start crying on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, that's genuine because I think you just described probably what is going on for a lot of us, particularly those of us who are just running around right now trying to figure out what to do because there's um, there's so much hidden grief. It feels like even just the way you just described that, Shanda, like you know it's there, but until you start talking about it, you don't realize how painful it is, right? Um, and that right there should tell you, me, a lot of us that we are carrying all within us this kind of extra weight, I think, of just this pain that we don't necessarily recognize, we don't give time to really recognize, and it doesn't mean that that weight doesn't go. It's just kind of sitting there, right? And so I'm sure right now, as you're talking, you're like, it might surprise you that you're feeling it, right? But as you talk about it, you're like, man, that feels like it's genuine. It feels like it's a thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like that's probably going on for a lot of us, a lot of people in around the world right now. That maybe we can think about it this way, and I'll maybe connect this back to what you're saying, Adrian, which is there's a difference between what I would call big G grief and little G grief, right? That big G grief is like the obvious, like yes, we've just suffered a loss of a loved one, or we've suffered this tremendous death, and it's affecting everybody. The small G grief is the one that kind of goes unnoticed, and sometimes we don't really give it the same kind of airtime, but they are grief. These experiences are grief, and so like to your example, Shanda, all of us have some example of like there's these small little losses that just kind of compound, and so maybe it feels a little bit more like death by a dozen paper cuts. There's just like a lot of little ones that kind of compound over time, and they add to this weight that we feel. And so yeah, maybe let's talk about it from that angle. And again, I want to try and connect this for our listeners because I want them to be able to one, not just understand what it is that they're going through, but to also understand what kind of steps we can take to begin to start the healing process as well, right? And so, yeah, any thoughts on that distinction, and also how you might talk to somebody in this kind of situation? Anyone want to chime in on that?
I mean, I would think you really hit on it very well when you talk about compounded grief, because you think about the loss of one event may not seem like such a big deal. And especially if it's not your event, if it's your child's event, or if it's a step removed from you. Um, but I mean, I've seen people grieving even the loss of sports because it's something that they pour themselves into. It's something that gives them an outlet, and they're not able to have that. And then you combine that with the loss of, the community groups that you're normally involved in, and you combine that with the loss of being able to go to work, and you combine that with the loss of being able to just walk in a grocery store and not have to pause before you walk down an aisle that has more than 10 people on it or seems crowded to you. And all of those things are just one on top of the other that make you feel like you're carrying a much heavier burden than any one of those events would do. And so, I mean, I've experienced this as well, is where it's like some days I'm just like, I don't even want to do this anymore. I want to just stay home and hide out and not talk with anyone. And I feel very isolated. But because of my job, I still go out because I have to come and work with people. But the other part of that is that I have to acknowledge the fact that there is grief there for these things that are lost. And I think it's important for everyone to kind of give themselves a pause and be sad about those things, because we've all have huge changes in our lives, and be careful not to discount the loss of other people. It's really easy to like say, oh, well, it's just a dance, or it
Mm,
was just but all of those are markers of life transition, whether it was a senior in high school, a senior in college, or a wedding, whatever it was. Those are all super important events that are being missed, and markers that are being not able to be celebrated.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a good reminder. The the markers, I like the way you put that there. They mean these little events can mean such big things for different reasons to different people, and it's really easy to miss that when we hear it from one another. That, like as you said, it's easy to minimize that. Um, because we're all going through our own different kinds of losses. So it's easy to like magnify our own and minimize other people's, right? Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone
Yeah.
else?
No, I think that's awesome. Lee, you touched in on something that I think is super important, and you phrased it of giving it airtime, right? Like
Mm.
actually acknowledging the pain that you're going through. I think sometimes when we, even as human beings, and Laura touched in on it, of like sometimes even we minimize it. Like, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like, there are people that are starving right now, right? And I shouldn't even worry about that. Who cares that my sports team isn't playing right now? I'll just keep moving on, right? And it's part of it. That's part of the issue, is not even giving yourself the grace and giving yourself the ability to say, you know what? No, I'm bothered by that. Like that hurts. I really wanted to go to that dance, right? Like I wanted to compete in that. I have a really close friend where her child, they had this national competition that they had literally worked basically half of her life to get to this. It would have led to the Olympics basically. Literally had worked her entire life basically to get to that point, and now they shut it down, and she's just been crying literally for days. And not the mother, the child. And it's, how do you grieve that, and how do you come around that? Well, the first thing is to recognize that that's that person's reality. Like Laura touched in on that perfectly, of saying, you know what, that was a milestone for a person that they have been working towards, and to step into that and recognize, you know what, in their reality, that's crushing for them. It may not be crushing for you because you have your own issues going on, but the ability to show that empathy to another person and say, hey, you know what, and pause what you've got going on and say, I'm sorry. All right, like it's okay to grieve that. It's okay to cry. Do what you
Mm-hmm.
need to do. Step into that pain first and foremost. First thing is to acknowledge it, that it's there, right? The second part for me is to step into it, and then to work your way through that grief and say, you know what, like this does hurt, right? Like this does hurt. There are some feelings there, and to keep working through it. And the last thing to me is to really recognize that of a person of like, hey, right now this is our reality, and every person's gonna have their own reality of what's been taken from them, what's had to be transitioned to. But at the same part of recognizing that, hey, this is a new normal for me. This is the new normal, and how am I going to work through this? I can either shell up and just kind of isolate myself and turn off all the lights and lock the doors, or I can say, you know what? Hey, this is what's going on right now. This is the new normal. How do I progress through this in a positive way? Because there are a ton of different positives that we can pull from this, or we can sit in the negative and
Yeah.
really just kind of let it consume us at this
Yeah.
point. So for me, it's more about shifting that perspective and saying, you know what? There are a ton of bad things that are happening right now, but how can I be a positive within it? How can I pull the positives out and start to move forward? And that's going to be much tougher for some people if they're extremely, if they're having a big G grief, right? Versus what's quote unquote a small G grief.
Yeah.
But regardless, there are a lot of positives that can be pulled out of that.
Yeah. I'm gonna add a wrinkle into this one because I think there's similarity. Just the way you guys are talking about it, it strikes a chord for me, and I want to try to maybe move that back into even just the way you've articulated this, Shanda. I've gone. Some of you might know, and I made references in maybe another podcast before, but I've got like so many of us that are listening here have gone through big G grief, and I've gone through big G grief recently. I've gone through child loss in the last 3 years. And there's some similarities, I think, between big G grief and small G grief. And one of the things that I recognized early on is the tendency to compare grief. It's like the tendency to compare loss. And I always kind of felt like I noticed, like if I share that I've gone through child loss, it almost feels like as though that pushes everyone else's grief out the water, right? And it's like, oh, I can't compare myself to that kind of grief. And I always, and it reminds me of what you're talking about right now, Adrian, in that we want to create validation and space for everyone's grief in different ways. And so if you're saying, I'm grieving the loss of my sports, or I'm grieving the loss of my school or my prom, there's a tendency to want to try to invalidate that, right? Either you're going to hear that, or you're going to say that to yourself. But so much of grieving has to start with allowing yourself to validate that feeling and to say it is a legitimate loss. And so I think that's one thing I really want to impress upon our listeners right now, that there are layers, multiple layers of different ways that you might be experiencing loss. And it's going to be hard, I think, maybe to feel as though it's legitimate and to not minimize it. But I think to your point, Adrian, it doesn't get better. We don't deal with these losses and these pains unless we can at least take the first step to acknowledge it and to validate that that's a real thing, right? And I think, Shane, I'm going to go back to something that you were saying before too. That makes this a little bit complicated as well. What makes this grief a little bit difficult, I think, for a lot of people, is that it's not quite certain yet what the totality of it is. Like, I think when you described at the harbor, like, okay, we're not going to meet this week, we might meet next week, and then it gets to a point where, like, okay, we're just going to have to call it. And for a lot of like students right now, we're like, are we even going to go back to school? Like, what's going to happen in the fall, right? There is an uncertainty behind how deep does this loss go. Like, we don't know yet, right? And so that's one other distinction I'll make between the different types of grief that we might be all experiencing, is that some grief is final. Like, hey, we know this is done, it's over. And so we can begin to say, okay, I have to let it go. Like, that's something I have to do to begin healing. For a lot of us, we don't know. And that makes the grieving and the healing process even harder. So I want to just say that makes it a little bit more complicated, and to validate that for a lot of our listeners, that we are in process of grieving and we don't know where the bottom end is. And so it's going to be a little bit harder. But I'll end with this in terms of just how we begin to recover from that, and kind of touching upon what you said, Adrian. Shanda, and just you being able to share that with us, I mean, I think that's a great modeling of what it looks like to talk with other people in connection. That as you're just kind of talking about it, you might feel like, oh, that there's more there, right? And the emotions come out, and those emotions can be surprising, they can be unsettling, they can be even be embarrassing, right? But when you do that in connection with other people, like one thing it does is it triggers something in me to say, you know, I get that, I feel, and there right there is an emotive connection, and I think that's mutually healing for all who are involved in that, right? So there's a benefit not just to you, but to me, to Adrian, to Laura as well, right? But I think as you do that, it begins the recovery process. That, like, okay, now I know what it is. I'm able to put words to it. I'm able to put tears to it, and I can begin to recover and to find more strength in connection through that, right? So those are the things I would say that are really important if I'm going to talk to somebody who has this situation going on. That those are different things that you want to be mindful of, and to create room to feel and to validate, but also to do it in connection with other people too. So those are just some of the things that even came up as you guys are talking about that. So you guys have any other, I want to just unpack this a little bit more for our listeners. Any other thoughts or observations that you would make as well?
Yeah, I want to go back to when Laura was talking about not discounting other people's grief. Sometimes when someone does what I just did and starts crying, it can be really awkward, especially if you're not used to being in an environment where people are really vulnerable and you don't know what to say. And sometimes the best thing to do is to not say anything. Brene Brown, I like to quote her, and she says, embrace the suck. Just embrace the awkwardness of the moment and let that person feel what they need to feel. And having a couple of just go-to responses that are helpful and not hurtful, and like that must be really hard for you. Like comments like that, I'm really sorry you're going through this. I'm really sorry you're experiencing this. I know that has to hurt. Things like that. Just having a couple of go-to responses in your mind, because things are going to come to the surface, and just embrace the suck. Let them feel what they need to feel. Don't discount their feelings. Yeah.
This is a good reminder. And in fact, I think we can maybe just talk for a few minutes, just since we have like three therapists in the room too, to maybe talk through how we do that. Well, how do we sit with other people and their grief and being able to validate that? I think that's maybe a good perspective to talk through from the angle of parents to kids to other adults, like with peer level. And so, do you guys have any thoughts about what you would coach someone to be able to say, to be able to sit well with other people in their loss and their grief?
I mean, I think one of the things that you do is just allow them to express whatever they're going to express without trying to offer solutions. A lot of times, as parents, especially when your kid is hurting or sad, your immediate response is, I need to fix this. I need to make this better for my kid. But there's nothing you can do to make this better. And sometimes, even if there is something you can do to make it better, you shouldn't do it. You should allow that feeling of sadness and grief just to happen. Because, I mean, there's a lot of things you can try to do to support that person, but you can't bring the prom back. You can't bring graduation back. You can't. There's a lot of these events that are just not going to happen, and we have to just be sad about that and to be sad with them. And I like what Shanda said about, having some empathetic statements that you kind of get used to saying, because it's okay to say, gosh, I hate that that's happening to you, and I wish I could make it different, but there's nothing I can do, and I just want to be here with you in it. And if you want to talk about it, if you want to cry about it, I'm willing to listen to that. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's good.
Absolutely. I think a lot of part of it, of what we've all really spoken about so much during this podcast, is like validation, self-validation, and then validating the other person of their pain is valid, right? And leaning into that moment, and even saying that ability to, I love, Laura, once you brought up the topic, Lee, I literally thought of like a husband and wife and diving in to fix the problem, right? Like putting on your husband hat and it's like, oh, let me fix this problem immediately. And it's truly that aspect of, some people just genuinely just want to vent in this moment. There are so many emotions going on in this moment. It's hurt. It's just anger for some people of what they've lost, whether even if it's on a financial aspect. A lot of people just need the ability to have that space to share, and you providing that space and not needing to fix it. And also for your vantage point, and Shanda, you spoke into it, of if that's not something you're comfortable with, but if you can understand, hey, they're not even asking me to fix this problem in this moment. They're literally, they just need someone to listen to them in this moment and in this season, to just be there for them. And I think part of it's explaining that to them, like, I'm just trying to be here for you in this moment. What can I do? Sometimes that's a good question for people as well, is how can I help you in this moment? Like, what do you need in this moment? What are some of the things you need? Maybe you just need me to sit here. Maybe you just need a hug. I know we're doing social distancing, but we're talking about people in our own home, right? So it's, maybe they just need that, some human contact, because let's be honest, that's something that's very lacking, right? For all of us. Especially if you're a physical touch kind of person. So some of those questions are also very, very warming for a person, to just let them know that they have that space to kind of do whatever they need, whatever emotion they're feeling, they have the space to do that.
Question
Yeah,
we
I think,
oh sorry. A question we ask a lot in my house whenever we're having those big emotion moments or something is, we'll say, okay, do you want me to help you fix it, or do you want me to sit with you in it? And then we immediately know the expectation. And usually it's, I just want you to sit with me in it. And it's, okay, I can do that. And then they just sit there and they listen and they have those go-to responses. And if you feel this conversation coming on, you know that, stuff, there's emotions bubbling to the surface, and you could pause for a second and say, okay, what is your expectation here? Because you want to meet their expectation. You want to also calm those feelings that are going to bubble up inside yourself of that, oh my gosh, I have to fix it. And you don't need to do that. So setting the expectation in the beginning of the conversation, I think, is helpful. I don't know if y'all have anything to say about that.
Yeah, no. That as a marriage counselor, that's one of the things I always recommend is like, hey, be specific about what it is you're hoping for in this conversation, right? Laura, you're about to say something?
Oh, I actually forgot what I was going to say.
It was, Shanda was so good. What you said was so awesome. It just completely.
It's going to be so good.
I wanted to, can I throw one more thing out too?
Yeah.
When you say to give it airtime as parents, and when those things are coming up, or just adults in general, you may have to schedule that space right now, because our schedules are so packed. I know, like with the way that I'm feeling, it's hard for me to get away from my children in this moment. And so if I need a private moment to just feel what I need to feel, then I almost have to schedule it, or maybe it's like a hot bath and a cry. I don't know, but like make that space, like really be intentional about creating that space to feel what you need to feel.
Yeah, no, that's a good reminder. And I think that's even a separate podcast in terms of just creating how to create space for each other, so that we can kind of make it through this season of life. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts that we want to try to add on to this one before we close it up? Okay. So things I'm really hearing out of this one is an experience that a lot of us are going through in different ways, us personally, those around us, that everyone is losing some way. Everyone is having to lose in some way. It may look very different from one person to another, but everyone is having to suffer loss. And I think there are some key things that we've taken from this podcast. The need to be able to validate that space for self and for others, to tag it as loss and to qualify it as loss, validate it that way. Be able to emotively connect with other people, create highly empathetic and non-fixing spaces between people to be able to start the healing process behind that. And to be able to start reframing and to start thinking through as you heal, to reframe the way you see these losses. And that all takes time, it takes work, but it definitely helps if you do it in connection with other people. And so, and I forget which, it was either Adrian or Shanda, but like, it was you, Shanda, just talking about how after going through things like this, there begins to be a newfound appreciation for the things that we have and the things that we had. And so I think that's probably going to be coming out for a lot of people, of just being much more. I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day when I was watching our service online at Chase Oaks. And right now we're all doing it remotely, but I'm thinking, man, what is it going to feel like when we go back and we're able to be in that auditorium again all together, and how sweet that will feel, right? It's something that we've taken for granted. Like, it's something that, oh yeah, we always do this, right? But once we have these things back, it's like, oh wow, this is so sweet. How many people are going to feel, oh, I'm back in school, how wonderful this is, right? There's a certain level of appreciation that comes out of loss. It's really hard to get to, but I think it makes it feel like life is fuller, and there's so much more to be thankful for and appreciative of. I remember feeling that way, just kind of as a closing note, just kind of thinking through the way loss works. I was literally thinking about that yesterday when I was kind of holding my 1-year-old Jacob, and after again going through child loss, just how wonderful it is to be able to hold your kids tight and to be able to hug them and to smell them, right? That's something that feels fuller after having gone through a painful loss, right? And so I think we're all going to be going through that in some way. It's just really hard to go through in that season. So I want to make sure we validate that and we create that kind of space to say, hey, that's a thing and that's okay. Okay, so let me go ahead and say a couple things. Definitely leave a comment in the comment section, to leave a question, because we really want to get engagement. We want to be able to hear from you guys what's going on so that we can talk about it. As well, we also have a set of videos out there that I just did called Anxiety Vaccination. Talks a lot through this subject that we're talking through, just looking at anxiety through the lens of loss and different ways that we can see loss and how we can recover. So definitely check that out. Go to our website, watershedinitiative.com. You can get access to those courses. You can get access to those videos, other podcasts, and also community Facebook groups where we can kind of just get involved in the groups and interact with one another and support one another, answer questions, and just support one another. So definitely check out all the resources that we have, watershedinitiative.com. And all right, I'm going to close it up here, and then we'll pick it up there. Maybe we'll get into some more topics about big G grief or some other ways that we can look about this kind of topic. So there's a whole lot more here that I want to definitely unpack with you guys. So Adrian, Laura, Shanda, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you guys in the next podcast. Thanks for listening. Now, if you benefited from this podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, share with your friends, and make sure to leave us a review on iTunes. It really does help us to keep making podcasts and more content like this possible for you. If you have any questions, want to get more content, or just want to stay connected with us, go to our website at watershedinitiative.com and follow us on social media. Lastly, if you want to get connected with a life coach or therapist, call us at our collaborative group practice, Lifeology in Richardson and Frisco, Texas at 214-556-0996.